Hello, welcome. This is HiFi-Hole, the hi-fi podcast that prioritizes your listening pleasure. Apologies if I'm sounding a little bit nasal. Unfortunately, I'm afflicted with hay fever, and at this time of year, it's not fun, as many of you hay fever sufferers will understand. What is hi-fi? That's the question we're exploring today. Thoughts, comments, questions, or opinions? Either on the subject at hand or the podcast in general, you can drop us a note via email hifi-hole at biscuit.ninja. That's hifi-hole at biscuit.ninja. Or via Blue Sky. Mention or DM hifi-hole.bsky.social. That's hifi-hole.bsky.social. Before we get on to the subject matter, there are a few standing agenda items. These are a few discussion points that will feature in most episodes. They are subject to change, and of course, if you have any comments about the agenda items we include, whereabouts we talk about them in the show, the length or breadth of them, then of course feel free to drop us a line. Your opinions are always welcome, and if you've got a particularly good or interesting opinion, then it may very well feature in the next episode. The first agenda item is this episode's album recommendation. This time I'm going with Florence and the Machine's Everybody Scream, released in 2025. I've always had a soft spot for Florence Welch's vocals. She's back with a new rawness. This album has a level of intimacy and honesty and a depth in lyrics which I don't think we've ever seen before from Florence and the Machine. It brings across a new maturity, and I think that elevates the album. Florence is, I can't fault the performance. There's quite a vast and impressive list of personnel involved in the production of the album. Now, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, but those personnel include the Idrisi or Idrisi ensemble and the all-female Deep Throat Choir. Highly recommend giving it a listen. Quick question for you. Should we feature a track each episode as well as an album? Or is the one album recommendation enough? Let me know. The next section is called New to Me Music, and it's about the new music that I've been listening to, or I will be listening to, that's arrived at HiFi-Hole HQ on physical media. As you learn more about the podcast, you will appreciate that I've got quite a love of physical media, although I do find streaming very convenient and very useful as well. 4 CDs arrived in the post this week. They aren't necessarily favourites. With some, I'm just broadening or fleshing out the CD collection. But here we go. First up is Kanye West's Late Registration, first released in 2005. This is one that's on the Rolling Stone Top 500 Albums of All Time, if I recall correctly. And I certainly remember it from my younger years, so I'm looking forward to giving that a listen. Next up is Dove's Kingdom of Rust, and that was first released in 2009. That's an album I'm already familiar with, and yeah, I quite enjoy it. I'm quite a fan of it, and of course, it fits into a genre of music which I'm very much down with. Same for the next album. This is Sea Power's the Decline of British Sea Power, which was released in 2003. Incidentally, that's when the band was still known as British Sea Power. They changed their name a couple of years ago out of concern, I think, for the connotations, which I thoroughly understand. And finally, from a band which I was a very big fan of in my teenage years, and of course, as you may have experienced, the music you listen to in your teenage years makes a big impression on your life and stays with you. That said, I do have a few reservations about Radiohead these days, but the album is Radiohead's Moon-Shaped Pool, which was released in 2016. Um, I think that actually completes my back catalogue of Radiohead's studio albums. Um, and yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why it took me so long to get that one. Radiohead, incidentally, first live gig I ever went to see, and I have to say it was absolutely phenomenal. I don't think there are many bands that truly sound better live, performing live, than they do performing in a studio where all the conditions are controlled, and of course the artists can select their best take. But yeah, I was very impressed with their live performance back in the late 90s. Next up, we have a vinyl LP, which was a gift from my wife. It's from an artist who I hadn't particularly heard of, called Jelly Roll. The album was released in 2021, and it is called Ballads of the Broken. Jelly Roll is a chap. His name escapes me at the minute, actually. Um, but I think he's actually a true rags to riches story, and he's also based out of Nashville. Might be of interest to you, or any of these albums may be of interest to you. Um, Let me know what you think. Do you have any recommendations for me? I'd be more than keen to hear. The final agenda item um, is hi-fi gear updates, or rather, hi-fi and gear updates. Um, yeah, this is one that may change in future. Um, as I said, all of these fixed agenda items, they're subject to change. We'll see how it goes. Um, this isn't meant to be a gear podcast per se. We may from time to time review some gear. We may do retro reviews. We may discuss the hi-fi industry and the way it's evolved over the years. But we're very much trying to get away from the audiophile affliction of upgrade-itis and put the music and the artists in the middle and at the centre of what we do, rather than focusing too much on the gear. It has to be said though, my natural inclination is to be a gearhead, and that's not just hi-fi. That's everything. I think it's what my wife describes as a stroke of the tism, but I do try and challenge myself to get away from that and really try and focus on what's important. And this podcast is actually a big step in doing that, I think. But anyway, nonetheless, we do have some hi-fi and gear updates, and some of it, at least from my perspective, is significant news. Uh, in the latter half of last year, really summertime, I bought a second-hand Riga Illicit R amplifier, which was my second Riga amp. Prior to that, I had the Elex-R for a little while, um, and the Illicit R came along as quite a good deal. So consequently, I didn't have the Elex for very long. And if I'm honest, for although the Elex has a lot of heft and really delivers, it's I almost hate the phrase, but it's very musical. It's very entertaining. It drew you in. The Illicit is a little bit more polite by comparison. but for everyday listening, um, possibly the better choice. And I have a subwoofer um, in my setup, which, of course, if you want that heft, then that can be tweaked. So in a way, I think the illicit being a little bit more polite means that I can get the best of both worlds, depending on what genre, what type of music I'm listening to, and or what mood I'm in. Anyway, after I'd had the illicit a few months, it developed a fault, rather an unusual fault, whereby if it was powered on for a few hours, at the end of a listening session, I would turn it off with, as usual, nothing out of the ordinary, and turning it back on the next time I wanted to use it, it was completely dead. No LEDs displayed, no relay noises. It was as if it either wasn't plugged in or switched off at the mains. And yeah, that turned out to be the amp blowing the fuse in the plug in the if I got this right, British Standard 1363 plug. Um, Changed the fuse, and we're back into working service again. And once again, the amp performed faultlessly. This has happened, I think, on average once every 6 to 8 weeks. But after it happened the third time, I thought it wise to get the amplifier checked out. It's not, it's not a particularly expensive piece of equipment by most, by some audiophile standards, particularly as I bought it second hand at a very good price. But it is expensive enough for me not to want to risk doing any permanent or long term damage to it. So, about 6 or 8 weeks ago, I got in touch with a chap called Phil. Phil from Cheshire Audio. Um, Now, he came as a personal recommendation from a close friend who also has the hi-fi bug, and he actually has a YouTube channel if you're interested, which is Cheshire Audio. So search YouTube for Cheshire Audio if you're interested. Now, the said close friend who recommended Phil had periodically recommended to me that I get a Riga Plane R8. And of course, I'd always really, to be honest, dismissed it as it's more than I could justify spending on a piece of hi-fi equipment. All of my gear to date has been bought either open box, refurbished, or straightforward second hand. However, whilst I was at the shop, which I have to say is quite impressive, and it's quite nice to see uh, a sort of old school shop without the pomp and ceremony, but with all of this hi-fi gear laid out. Phil very kindly let me talk myself into buying the Riga Plane R8. I'm not going to talk too much about that yet. I'm still running it in. Uh, I will say that my first impressions, though, are very good. I'm very impressed with it. Um, yeah, Phil can't take all the credit due to a few suggestions I've had about this particular turntable, but he did certainly, without too much encouragement, permit me to talk myself into it. Last week I collected that turntable. Well, it's probably a bit more than that now. It's probably 2 weeks ago with the repaired amplifier. The amplifier was repaired by Riga, they replaced the mains transformer, but unfortunately the fault manifested again within a couple of days, which is unfortunate. But Riga, I'm assured, have tested the amplifier. They've let it have a good sort of soak test, and they're happy it is performing. So I think for now, until the fault becomes more frequent, I'm happy to carry on using it. I absolutely cannot fault the service that I've received, both from Riga and from Phil. Um, the amplifier has been repaired at no charge to me, and I've not even paid any postage for the shipping between Phil's store, Cheshire Audio, up in Crewe, and Riga, who are based down in Southend. Let me say it properly, Southend in Essex. My wife is from Essex, so we do quite often get the that very distinguished accent breaking out now and then. It's always very obvious when my wife has been talking to her relatives. Anyway, I've bought a few second-hand Riga components over the years. I've had the DAC, the aforementioned Elex R, the Elicitar. I've got a Saturn R, which again is a good piece of equipment. Um, and yeah, I wanted to support Riga financially for once instead of buying their gear second hand. Um, they do have absolutely fantastic support for their older products. I think they're actually on record somewhere as saying, they will have a go at repairing anything, which is almost unheard of. Um, and from the sort of sustainability perspective, I think that's really important. They produce gear that's meant to last a long time, much more than the duration of its warranty, and they're happy to have a good stab at fixing it when it goes wrong. Um, and I understand that most Riga products now come with a lifetime warranty to the first owner, but even with the second gear, they don't charge the earth for repairs where they feel they have to charge. Um, a lot of that information is second hand, of course. In my dealings with them, they haven't charged me. Yeah, the one final thing to say about Riga as a company before I move on. Not only do they have a fantastic ethos, but it's now become an employee-owned company, which is a great thing. Right, I'm sorry, I've droned on a little bit there, a bit more than I intended to, but hey, this is the way that sometimes these things happen, especially when you're not trying to work to a script. I've got a few notes here. Um, in a previous take, I did work from a script, but it's when you're trying to concentrate on reading and trying to concentrate on speaking, it can become incredibly obvious that you are just reading from a script. So we're trying to do this a little bit more off the cuff with a set of notes. But again, I'm new at this. I've no real prior experience of podcasting. I've got some experience of public speaking, but that's almost a different thing entirely. It's very different when you don't have a captive audience live in the room. So I will, on those grounds, very much welcome any feedback you have. And, my intention in the long term is to try and make this podcast just as much about its listeners as it is about my experience with music and hi-fi. So your opinions are highly valued, highly sought after, and yeah, maybe further down the line, we may get some live interaction going with some of our recordings. Anyway, I'm droning on again, so I will move on to the next thing, which is just to say, still under that heading of hi-fi and gear news, but I will touch on it quickly. Um, I have procured a Zoom H5 Studio handy PCM recorder for two reasons. One is the flexibility in recording this podcast. Um, I have tried to divorce my music and hi-fi shenanigans from computers as much as I can. My day job is working with technology. I have done so for 24 years. Well, almost 24 years. There was a short break. And for me, it's refreshing to have a hobby that doesn't too heavily involve that side of technology. And having the handy recorder means that I can record this podcast anywhere. I'm using a Laravel mic with it. I think I might switch to a dynamic microphone. But yeah, if there's a distinct difference in audio quality between this episode and the first episode, now you know why. The second reason for buying the Zoom H5 Studio was, and really it's a primary reason, um, it seemed like an economical way for me to get high quality rips of vinyl LPs, so that I still had the option of listening to some of them on the go. Furthermore, um, I like to put on an LP when I've got time to sit and actually listen and give my full attention to what I'm listening to. It's a nice part of the process. LPs are relatively expensive. The equipment to get quality reproduction of LPs that rival digital sources like streaming, both internet streaming, streaming from your own music collection, CDs, is the investment there I think is considerably more. You can get a good CD player for about £250. Considerably less second hand. There are some fantastic deals on CD players and of course CD transports and DACs in the used marketplace. Whereas in my experience, at least, you're up to at least double that for a reasonable sort of turntable. I know there are some cheaper options, which I haven't heard personally, but I think there's a good selection once you get up to £500 or £600, and then on top of that, you need a cartridge that performs reasonably well, and if you're not fortunate enough to have an amplifier or a headphone amp with a good phono stage, then of course you need to get a phono stage as well. So for me, listening to vinyl LPs is one of the ways that I spoil myself, which it doesn't happen often enough. And of course, I don't really want to wear out styluses or records when the music is very much in the background, when it's secondary tasking. So, yeah, the other notion is that I will rip them and play them from my either my digital audio player or I've got a virtual machine sitting on a server that's in my garage that's running Jellyfin, and at the moment that's what I use to feed my network streamer and phone and various other devices for music reproduction. Right, that was again more detail than I intended to share. I am not known for being brief. Brevity is not my strong suit. So yeah, I can either try and do better or let you like or lump it. Let me know. Is it a problem or is it something you quite enjoy? Okay, we'll actually move on now to the subject of this podcast. With the formalities out of the way, it is time to dissect the meaning of hi-fi. Now, first of all, I think it's important to point out that hi-fi is an abbreviation of high fidelity, and that can be used as an adjective to describe a particular kind of sound or quality of sound reproduction. And it is also often used as a noun to describe um, the equipment used for audio reproduction, and even sometimes for audio recording. So yeah, we've got hi-fi as a verb and hi-fi as a noun. I'm not going to get too hung up on that. We're going to switch between the two as we go on with this discussion. I thought I'd get that way get that out of the way though for the pedantics, and it's fine to be pedantic. If you are pedantic, you're actually in good company. Especially when it comes to language, I really think the meaning of things and the cues that people convey with their use and use of language and choice of words. Yeah, that's a whole thing with me, and very yeah, it's very important. It's often overlooked, I think. Um, Again, before we go down another rabbit hole, we will press on. Um, Hi-fi conjures up different things for different people, and I think what it conjures up, it depends on very much your perspective. Do you own any hi-fi gear? Did you consciously go out and buy that gear, or was it a sort of default choice for you? Um, I think people that experiencing hi-fi without being conscious of it, and people who are conscious of it that go out of their way to get good sound reproduction in their homes or their headphones, um, that they're going to have very differing ideas on what hi-fi is. So that's something we could explore. The first thing I did though was have a look at the Oracle, which is better known as Wikipedia. According to Wikipedia, hi-fi is the high-quality reproduction of sound. It is popular with audiophiles and home audio enthusiasts. Um, Now, thinking about audiophiles and home audio enthusiasts, I think there's very much a blurred line there. But as we're talking about both, that delineation perhaps doesn't matter so much. But it could be a whole topic for a further discussion. Um, are you an audiophile or a hi-fi enthusiast, or neither? Do I consider myself an audiophile? No, no, not really. Um, I would say I don't have the ears, but I think in reality, not many of us do. Um, the It is truly a very small minority of people that have pitch perfect hearing, and I think those of us who may consider ourselves hi-fi enthusiasts, um, our hearing is probably on a journey. Oh, it is on a journey. I mean, it changes as we age. But also um, what we discern from what we listen to um, changes. It generally improves, I think, as we try and listen more conscientiously and more objectively to music, and of course other things, audio. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting tangent. Anyway, Wikipedia goes on. Ideally, high fidelity equipment has inaudible noise and distortion, and a flat frequency response within the human hearing range. Um, which is, yeah, we've moved on to talking about hi fi as an adjective a little bit there, to hi fi as a noun to describe the equipment. Um, I fully agree. Unwanted noise and distortion. Yes, the quest for good sound pre-production definitely involves those things. The flat frequency response, though, I'm not so sure about that because our ears don't have a flat frequency response. And indeed, that response varies with the volume of the music. For any of you that remembers, 80s hi-fi and hi-fi before then, maybe late 60s and 70s, the loudness button, which of course gave a boost. It's not a button that makes the music louder. It's a button that gives a boost to the bass and treble regions to compensate for how our ears work with lower volume music reproduction, audio reproduction. Um, we don't hear the lower range and the upper range frequencies so well at low volumes, and I believe that's called the Munchen curve. I may be mispronouncing that. My pronunciation of some words is awful, but yeah, that is a recognised thing. I think it was discovered or at least formalised in experiments conducted by Bell Laboratories, and you know our hearing is actually optimized for the for human voices in many respects. We have this audiologist will talk about this thing called the speech banana, which refers to the sort of shape of the frequency response um, in our hearing, where it is optimized for hearing human voices. Anyway, that's all very interesting, but possibly getting off topic and doesn't really help in terms of giving us a tangible idea of what hi-fi is. After Wikipedia, I had a quick look at the Oxford English Dictionary, which gives two definitions, and one is the high quality reproduction of sound, and the next is a set of equipment for playing CDs or records in high fidelity sound. Is that any more helpful than what we had from Wikipedia? I'm not so sure, but what is interesting is that it refers specifically to CDs and records, presumably vinyl records. I'm guessing the Oxford English Dictionary hasn't quite caught up with modern day streaming, with, of course, has lossless services available and very high bit rates available. Um, Not to mention, the availability of DSD audio from um, specialist vendors. It's got to be a better word than vendors, but you guys know what I mean. If we look back historically, then hi-fi, uh, the abbreviation of high fidelity, was first used allegedly, according to the records we have, in 1947. That, and I should caveat that's the records we have that are publicly accessible. It was used as a marketing term to describe the audio from radio receivers. Of course, in the 40s, predominantly the only choice of music reproduction available in many households was broadcast radio. As I wasn't around then, so I'm definitely not talking from experience. But as far as I understand, um, this is a period of time marginally before the long playing record was created by CBS Studios. I believe that first came to market in 1948. Um, so what were available were these. I think they were 12-inch um, records, or word is escaping me. Um, but they were what were called 78s because they were span at 78.3 revolutions per minute. Um, and I think that speed actually was selected for two reasons. I think one was technical, as it was a multiplier of the speed a motor ran off available mains electricity. I think. Oh, excuse me. And the other reason was because the shellac, which is, I believe, a substance secreted by a beetle, if I recall correctly. But shellac made for is quite an abrasive and noisy surface, so it certainly wasn't considered high fidelity, and to make up for that, the a higher speed was selected with the advent of the long playing record that was made from vinyl or PVC, polyvinyl chloride, and that made for a much quieter surface, which meant that the records could be spun at a lower speed without a massive degradation in quality. And that was one of the contributory factors that made LPs with the right equipment, of course, high fidelity. The other aspect was the invention of the micro groove. I believe. Yeah, I suppose I need to clarify really what contribution that makes to the sound quality, but it certainly made a difference to the runtime of the records because it meant obviously more grooves could be included on each disc, which gave the LP initially a running time of 20 to 22 minutes per side. Um, I know there are some which are 25 minutes per side. Um, but I think the optimum is around 20 to 22 minutes per side. I'm getting into way too much detail here. Excuse me. So yeah, 1947, the year before the first LPs were released by CBS or Columbia Music. CBS being Columbia Broadcasting Studios, I think. Anyway, moving on. Prior to that use of hi-fi in 1947 to describe radio receivers, we have the use of high fidelity. The first use of that was recorded in 1937. Um, I fell a bit short on confirming the context for that, but I suspect again it was probably in relation to radio receivers and the marketing thereof. Um, Possibly. Um, the other train of thought on this is that maybe high fidelity was really an engineering term, and this next sort of subsection looks at that. In researching the topic, I stumbled across the book published in 1952 by, and again I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, Harold D. and it's either Wheeler or Weiler. Um, his book was called High Fidelity Simplified. The first edition, of course, being published in 1952. I think there have been at least one, maybe two more editions since. Um, and if you do an internet search for High Fidelity Simplified with your search engine of choice, you'll probably actually find or stumble upon a PDF copy of it. I believe it might be out of copyright, but it seems to be very much in the public domain if you want to look at that yourself. That book has a preface written by Peter C. Goldmark, and he oversaw the development of the long playing record LP at CBS Laboratories. And he wrote, high fidelity means different things to different people. To the engineer, it means a wide range of frequencies. To the layman, it means superior sound reproduction. So that's interesting. He makes a distinction there between what high fidelity means to engineers and non engineers. He goes on to say the expression high fidelity is probably misleading to the average person, and what people really seek could be called realism. That's interesting, and I think in some ways still relevant. And I think in reality, realism is a much better word, a much better description. It ties into, I think, the joy that I get when I listen to my hi-fi these days. You know, there are certain recordings that I can listen to, and a lot of recordings in reality I can listen to, and it feels like despite all of the shortcomings that and constraints that I have. I mean, my listening room is very small. It doubles as my office, so it is far from ideal. But despite those things, it does sound sometimes like I'm getting my own private performance. Last night, I was listening to a Nora Jones LP. The name of it escapes me. I have a terrible memory, and I haven't got this noted down. I do recall it was released in 2021, though, so that might help you out. And it is a release with live recordings of songs that the recordings aren't necessarily recorded in the last 20 years, but they are songs she has performed over the last 20 years. And the recordings are from different locations. There's a few in America. There's Brazil, there's Italy, there's France, um, and it's a good record. It's not great, but it is very good. And listening to that, sorry, with the Riga Planar 8 plugged into the phono stage on the Illicit R. I haven't got a discrete phono stage yet, and that's something I'm thinking about. Um, and that reproduced by I've got a set of Wilson Benesch ARC speakers. Um, Wilson Benesch are a very upmarket brand these days, and their equivalent current standmount speakers go for an awful lot of money, more than I could ever conceivably justify. But these, I think they produced as they were going up market. Their original retail price, I think, just over a decade ago, was within the realms of the affordable. And I bought these from a close friend, second hand, and at a price I could not refuse. So I'm very, very lucky to have these speakers, and they are incredible. But yeah, this performance, I really felt like I could be convinced with my eyes closed that I am listening to a live performance. Um, and I think there's a track. I think it's the fourth track on the album. It's called, I think, those three words or these three words. Um, and I felt like that Nora was in the room, and the piano that she was playing was in the room. I don't think up until that point I had actually heard a piano sounding so real. Um, and yeah, there you go. So realism. I think realism is a really good word for describing what we mean by hi-fi or high fidelity in terms of the sound that's reproduced. Um, so thinking a little bit about how hi-fi has changed over the decades, I do plan a future episode actually on the history of hi-fi, but just glossing over this briefly, the equipment has changed, the media and the way we consume it has changed. Um, as already mentioned, we had the wireless um, or broadcast radio. Um, that is the first way that audio reproduction really became accessible to the masses. Of course, with the invention of the transistor radio, it became even more affordable and even more commonplace. Then we have records with the shellac 78s, phonograph discs. Phonograph, I think, is the word that I was struggling to remember earlier. Um, but yeah, we had the shellac 78s, which gave way to the 12-inch LPs and 7-inch singles. If you were well heeled and you were around in the I think 60s, late 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even today, you might have a reel-to-reel machine. Um, we had cassette tapes. Cassette tapes. They are a media that I have a huge amount of enthusiasm for. They democratized hi-fi. They saw the birth of the mixtape, and they represented a huge challenge to the status quo in terms of a medium that could be used to cheaply record demos tapes, and in a way, they absolutely transformed the music industry. Um, so we had cassette tapes coming along, which meant that music could become portable and personal listening um, became a thing. We only have to mention the Sony Walkman and the effect that that had. Um, in the early 80s, CD came along. Um, then we get into a slew of formats which well, they took off in some places and not so much in others. We had a couple of attempts to replace the CD. There was Super Audio CD, SACD. There was another contending format that was supposed to succeed Redbook CDs. I forget the name of that just now. Um, we've had DVD audio, and yeah, with all of those formats, none of them really supplanted the CD. I do understand that there is still some love for SACD, but it is still quite a niche. However, it is possible to go and buy an SACD player today, and it is possible to still go and buy SACDs. A bit like with reel to reel, you can still buy, I understand, a reel to reel machine. I think Akai still manufacture one. And I do also believe there are companies who specialize in refurbishing um, older reel to reel machines. I believe there are SACD players that you can still buy. And I think there is a brand out there or a company out there in America. Excuse my phone. I should really have put that on silent. That is a misstep. Um, but there is a company out there in America. Name's not coming to me. Begins with an M, and I believe they manufacture a Blu-ray player that can pretty much play all of the prior disc-based formats, digital disc-based formats, not Laserdisc, of course, or any of the. I think there was Laserdisc, and I think there was another analog disc format. Um, I remember as a child being absolutely enchanted by Laserdiscs. There was a hi-fi shop um, I visited sometimes, and they were heavily promoting Laserdisc. I think this would have been late 80s or early 90s, and it just seemed amazing to me at the time. The marketing clearly worked. But then I remember being absolutely amazed by CD. I think when we finally got a CD player into the house in my late 80s. Sorry, in not in my late 80s, in the late 80s. I haven't quite reached that tender age as yet. Um, So yeah, we were talking about equipment, and I've digressed. Of course, we've gone through a number of different formats, but we're now at the point where the internet is becoming a thing. Um, Obviously, we had what we called the internet existed for quite a while beforehand, but in the very late noughties, sorry, in the very late 90s and early noughties, um, more and more households and more people were getting access to the internet. And so we kind of had CD rips and MP3s becoming available. And there were various services that we won't discuss too much right now for sharing um, those those CD rips, um, which is another stepping stone, another sort of democratization of the music industry, not in quite the same way as cassette, but it democratized for a while the consumption of music for a while. Um, and with that, of course, we had MP3 players and the iPod becoming coming into being. Now, I think it is a little bit contentious as to whether or not we can describe MP3s as high fidelity. I remember ripping my CD collection probably in the late 90s. I think it was the late 90s. Um, and, at that time, storage, hard disk space, it was still quite hefty in terms of cost. And I ripped my CD collection, I think, at 128 bits, kilobits per second, which, is not. Yes, it's listenable. Yes, it's probably fine for background listening, but and depending on what kind of system you're using to reproduce it, it might be okay. But today, um, that just wouldn't be good enough. I don't think to be considered high fidelity. I think at that sort of bit rate, there are artifacts in the recording, or rather in the reproduction of the recording, which can be heard with good ears or well trained ears and resolving reproductive equipment. So yeah, I think it wasn't really until um, a little bit later on where lossless formats arrive, good lossless formats, um, and eventually we get the advent of high quality lossless streaming. Um, and in the background, ever since sort of the mid noughties onwards, vinyl never really went away. It dropped into a niche, I think, but still, it still had its it still had a stable pool of people who maintained their interest in in vinyl records. But what we have seen is a real resurgence in vinyl, and I think yeah, I'll make two observations there. I think my interest in hi-fi is fairly recent, and with that, my interest in vinyl is fairly recent. So I am very much part of that resurgence. And I think, in a way, it's great. I think it's great that this is happening and getting people interested in music and hi fi again. Um, I think it's absolutely fantastic, actually, in a way. Um, what I came to realize, and it wasn't really vinyl that got me back into it, it was ironically, it was the fallout from the COVID pandemic when I switched to home working, and I was in a place where I could enjoy music as I worked, and this led to the purchase of my first, in air quotes, hi-fi gear. Um, and what I realized very quickly was that it was a much better way to enjoy music. Um, Listening to music in the ways that I had been prior to that, I was not engaging with it. I was not appreciating it. I was not appreciating the talents and the work of the artists. It's not because I didn't want to. It's because I couldn't hear it. Um, so, I think it would be nice if everyone had access to audio reproduction of a reasonable quality, such that it sounded realistic. Um, So yeah, talking about the equipment, we've gone from valves to solid state. Initially, we had these consoles, which were basically uh, music reproduction systems built into big pieces of furniture. Um, and the transition to transistors and solid state meant the miniaturization of hi-fi. Um, it meant that we got, instead of consoles, we got receivers and eventually separate systems, which were popularized in the late 70s and 80s. Um, but hi-fi has gotten smaller. It's become less of a sort of what we might call a living room staple. And as a result, a lot of people listened using sound bars in their living room. Um, some people will listen with active speakers that have perhaps a streaming capability, or even a phono stage if they've kept their record players. We've had Bluetooth speakers, and these all-in-one just add speaker type systems. Um, so yeah, what we perceive as hi-fi in terms of media and equipment, how it really has evolved over the decades. Now we've got streaming, and now that that's the majority the way that the majority of people consume music, is that where it's going to stay? I'm not sure. Um, but I can't wait to see, to be honest. Um, yeah, the next question I've got jotted down here is where are the lines drawn between hi-fi, mid-fi, and lo-fi? And you can see that I've been skirting around back. Sorry, you can see that I've been skirting around that with the talk about formats and media and equipment. Um, I think I'm gonna leave it there though. I'm gonna leave that as a thought for you guys, perhaps. Sorry, you guys and gals. Um, Perhaps you have your own thoughts and you would like to share those. Um, yeah, I think so. We've discussed this flat frequency response, and we've discussed human hearing. There was one more thing I wanted to mention there, and that was studio monitors. Um, there's this concept of the BBC dip or the Grundig dip, which I don't want to go into too much detail over, but studio monitors that are said to have this dip, they have a slightly subdued, and by slightly subdued, I think it's typically between 1.5 and 3 dB, but they have this slightly subdued frequency response between 1 and 3.5 kilohertz. Um, I did try and do a little bit of digging into this. It's attributed to different reasons by different people. Um, and there's even some archived material from the late 50s and 60s which attributes it to different reasons. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this for that reason, but the three reasons that I've got are This dip was there to make an orchestra sound more realistic. Without it, an orchestra would sound like it's placed very close to the listener, whereas um, that dip means that the loudspeakers have a more realistic reproduction, with the orchestra sounding like it is some way away from the listener's positioning. And that's interesting. I've included that one because, the reason given is realism. Um, one of the other reasons given is that the dip was intended to reduce the artifacts of stereo imaging. Um, now, some people attributed that to limitations of the materials used to manufacture the speakers and the crossovers and the drivers at the time. But and as a result, they could sound a little bit hot in the sort of upper mid to high frequency range, and that would result in stereo imaging artifacts. I'm not sure how much truth there is there to that. I mean, obviously, I've never had any of these studio monitors, um, so I can't comment on the way that they image and whether there's any artifacts from said stereo imaging. Um, and the third often cited reason that I came across was to reduce listening fatigue. Make of that what you will. If you know different, if you can add any weight or credibility to any of that, then it would be great to hear from you. I do genuinely find it fascinating. Um, However, the point remains that some studio monitors do not have a flat frequency response, and that is allegedly, possibly, to give them a more realistic listening experience. Um, so I'm going to start wrapping this up. I have droned on for far longer than intended. I'll be honest, this was meant to be a 30-minute episode, and I can see we're up to an hour already. Um, I'm going to talk about what I personally consider hi fi to be. And I've written here, and I'm going to quote: the conscious selection of recordings, media, and equipment, even including room treatments, in the personal pursuit of a better listening experience. In other words, it just means to me that someone has made an effort to get what they perceive to be good sound and more enjoyment of the music. Apologies there if you can hear the dog barking on this recording. He's uh, he's quite a character, and I think he's going to end up featuring on a few of these podcasts. Um, yeah, I'm going to go on to say that I don't think budget or choice of equipment type necessarily come into it. And by equipment type, I'm talking about the choices people make, whether they're going for separates or all-in-one systems, whether it's a HiFi setup or even car audio. Um, I think all of those things can be hi-fi, and I don't think that it necessarily correlates with the amount of money spent. Um, when I came into this hobby, um, I spent £125 on some old separates. And most of these, I think, were first manufactured sometime in the 1980s. I think a couple of these components might have been early to mid 90s, but we're in 2026 now, so all of this was, in general, more than 30 years old. A Yamaha AX300 amplifier, and that was an entry level amplifier back in the day. The complementary Yamaha TX300 tuner, um, and a Yamaha CDX 730E CD player, which was, I think, a middle to upper range CD player back in the day. Um, and that was, I believe, a little bit newer than the amplifier and tuner. Um, and to that system, I added a set of JBL Control 1 speakers. They set me back, I believe, £90. So for around about £215, I had my first. I'm gonna call it hi-fi. Um, Now that could take us back to what is lo-fi, what is mid-fi, what is hi-fi, but I am going to call it hi-fi. It wasn't perfect, but it was far better than listening to any of the Bluetooth speakers that I had at the time, and it was far better than listening to the soundbar that we had in our living room at the time. It really got me enjoying music again. Um, I was hearing things in the music I'd not heard before. I was hearing particularly voices, artists' voices that sounded much more realistic to me than they had before. Um, I even added a Yamaha KX580 cassette deck to that system, which I still own today. Um, so yeah, that I suppose it might be considered a not insignificant sum by a lot of people. Um, but I know to a lot of people that would call themselves audiophiles, it's this tiny outlay. Um, my point is though that you can get hi-fi on a budget if you need to. So I don't think money necessarily comes into it, and it is possible to get competent head-fi for considerably less than that outlay. Um, and in many ways, I think hi-fi today is more accessible than it's ever been, which is good news. Now, I'm talking a little bit about the cost, and I don't mean to say that cheap, subpar equipment does not exist. We've all been subject to listening to music via tinny speakers that, they have no bass. They have no bass, let alone sub bass. They are missing many octaves of their frequency range. Oh, sorry, they are missing many octaves of the recorded frequency range. Um, there are systems that are marketed for their bass. And, I remember this in the the early 90s and the late 80s, particularly with Walkmans and these hi-fi mini systems where, they were advertised as having a bass boost system. And, it did work. They did deliver bass, but it was often woolly or muddy. It wasn't to say it wasn't enjoyable, but it wasn't hi-fi. And when all of your bass frequencies are smearing or blurring together, um, it's very hard, I think, to discern what it is sometimes you're listening to. Um, the final offender I'm going to talk about here are cheap soundbars that they have. They're built to have sort of a section that goes below the television that's quite small, and they can often have tiny little tweeters, and they quite often ship with a box that is a subwoofer that you hide down behind your TV unit. Those soundbars, in my experience, they tend to have no mid range at all. Now, I was listening to one of these. That's what we had downstairs in our living room, as I've already sort of referred to. And it was fine until I got this system that I talked about, and I kind of started to realize all of this mid range was missing. Or, if it was there, it wasn't very well pronounced. And that leads me on to the problems that are presented by lo-fi, the subpar equipment. Now, I don't think it is as simple as saying, subpar equipment is bad. I think it actually affects us in ways that are a little bit more profound than that. I think the first issue I have is that it is not obvious how bad subpar equipment can sound. Um, our ears do tend to compensate a little bit. Um, sometimes with some systems, that sub bass isn't there, but if we hear um, a fundamental of it, um, the mind kind of reproduces it in our head. I think it's a bit like watching a black and white TV, and the first television that I ever had was a black and white TV. After a while, um, I think your mind puts the color in for you, and it almost becomes, a non-issue. I would say I'd be quite happy, I think, watching black and white TV again because of the power that the mind has. Um, I'll caveat that, we get much higher definition television or visual experiences than we used to, and I think in reality the definition is far more important than you know the color aspect because of the way our minds work. And the same thing I believe happens to a point with audio. Our brains compensate for poor quality audio. Um, the other aspect is where our brains don't compensate, you can't hear what is missing from an audio reproduction. Um, if you don't know, you don't know. Whereas as soon as you get a better reference to listen to, you start to realize. So, yeah, that is the first real problem with subpart audio. People don't know what they're missing out on. The second, which I think is very much related to that, um, subpart audio does not encourage people to listen properly. And that in itself isn't the problem, it's the fact that the music does not draw the listener in. And it does not sustain the listener, it does not keep their attention. Um, and I think that has a further knock on in that artists and musicians go unappreciated. I know I've been in a position where I've not particularly enjoyed a piece of music, but then and I do this consciously these days. I try and make a mental note, and sometimes I'll even make a written note. And I will come home and I will listen again to that piece of music on my own hi-fi. And to my surprise, sometimes I find I will enjoy it. That is the difference that between subpar audio and hi-fi. I think it really helps us develop a connection to the music we're listening to, and thus a connection to the artists and the contributors, and even the mixing engineers and the mastering engineers, the way that the music is even is produced. So I think it leads to much greater appreciation, and I think that is a really important thing, especially for artists that are less well known, who would really benefit from having a broader audience. Um, and in the same vein, I think it can encourage people to be curious about music, explore new artists, explore new genres. So, yeah, I think it's a great shame that we unwittingly sometimes put up with subpar equipment. Um, and that kind of, relates to my third point. Actually, I've drifted well onto my third point in reality. Um, all I'll say is that, it is a crime that subpar and lo fi equipment can make good music sound mediocre or worse. Final thing to say on that then. Um, having blurred my lines between these what were succinct points, um, is that some music is actually mixed and produced in a way that it compensates for poor reproduction equipment. Um, and I think that can lead to, loudness, a lack of dynamic range. It can lead to overemphasis or a sort of over processed sound. And I don't like that. Um, Sometimes I will put popular radio on, for want of a better way of putting it. And I'm amazed at how overprocessed some of it sounds. And I find it incredibly fatiguing to listen to for a long period of time on my system now, which I find, is a pleasure to listen to most of the time. And this is actually something that I kind of realized last night when I was contemplating what I was going to say today. I've realized that my hi-fi, or my main hi-fi that I listen to most of the time, is a lot less fatiguing than I find that or found historically listening to music to be. And I think that is twofold. I think that is because of the high quality of reproduction, but I also think it's because I have adapted to listening to more music more often. Um, so, in a way, then, what I'm saying is the avoidance of usually very cheap and always nasty subpar equipment can also be considered hi-fi or an extension of hi-fi, an extension of that consciously seeking out higher quality recordings and equipment, and of course, perhaps treating your listening spaces to get that better sound quality without, you know, near field reflections of sound waves muddying and smearing the sound. Um, that really wraps things up far later than I'd anticipated. Once again, you can always share your opinions. I am eager to hear what you have to say via hi-fi-hole at biscuit.ninja. I'll give that you I'll give that to you one more time. Hi-fi-hole at biscuit.ninja. But also via Blue Sky, mention or DM hi-fi-hole at bsky.social. I wish you happy listening. I wish you happy listening in your endeavours, and I look forward to catching you in the next episode. See you next time on Hi-Fi Hole.